The simple house where Andrew lived with his family was in a small town in rural Arizona, surrounded by roads that seemed to cut through the endless desert. It was in that house that Michael and Logan, identical twin brothers, were born. From an early age, each showed distinct personality traits. While Michael was a boy who liked to help his father with any task, Logan always showed restlessness, as if the humble environment suffocated him. Andrew was a man of simple yet dedicated habits. During his youth, he worked in construction and manual labor until he got an opportunity at a trucking company. It was in that truck cabin that he found his place and felt the desire to start his own business. Over time and with a lot of effort, he saved up enough money to buy his first used vehicle. He named it Margaret in honor of his wife. A few years later, he managed to acquire a second truck, and thus the small transport company that would form Andrew's legacy for his family was born. Margaret, his wife, also came from humble origins. Her priority in life was always the well-being of her children. Affectionate and with a compassionate gaze, she resolved the arguments between the boys with touching patience. One hot summer afternoon, when Michael and Logan were arguing about who would drive their father's old pickup truck to help him in the workshop, Margaret approached them, wiping her hands on a worn apron. She looked at both of them and said, "You need to stick together. One day your father won't be here to settle these fights. Then you'll realize how much you need each other." Michael fell silent, as if reflecting on her words. Logan rolled his eyes, unable to hide his impatience. Even so, he obeyed his mother's order. Maybe he wasn't willing to confront her, or perhaps he just preferred to avoid longer arguments. Peace in that house was constantly preserved by Margaret's calm demeanor. The years went by quickly. Andrew's small trucking company did not bring great luxuries, but it provided a decent livelihood for the family. From a young age, Michael showed an affinity for truck mechanics and was always ready to help his father on long hauls whenever possible. Logan, on the other hand, aimed high. He felt that life on the road was limited. He had some administrative jobs in the transport company, but he seemed to crave something bigger and faster, lacking patience for the pace Andrew considered safe and honest. When they turned 20, each twin took a different path. Michael decided to specialize in logistics and learned every management detail alongside his father, while still driving trucks. Logan, meanwhile, enrolled in quick entrepreneurship courses and made contacts with influential people who promised him bigger opportunities than a simple family business. Andrew was proud of both sons, although he worried about the fast-paced direction Logan was pursuing. Margaret watched everything in silence, but her mother's heart could not ignore the tensions that occasionally rose between the brothers. One morning, Michael came into the kitchen with a look of great enthusiasm. He had been accepted into a transportation management course that offered evening classes. He wanted to continue working days at the transport company and at night deepen his knowledge. Margaret kissed his forehead and said, "I'm very proud of you, my son. I'm sure your father will be overjoyed to hear this news." Logan was also in the kitchen and, upon hearing the conversation, reacted with a crooked smile. College, courses, all just theory. What really matters are contacts, fast business deals, and opportunities that few people see. That's what will really make someone rich. Michael frowned but avoided replying. Margaret sighed quietly, pouring coffee into the cup of her more ambitious son. Gently, she commented, "Money is important for comfort, but we shouldn't forget our values." Logan got up from his chair, grabbed his keys, and before leaving retorted, "Values don't pay bills, Mom. I want more from life than driving trucks in the dust." The door closed, leaving a sense of uncertainty hanging in the kitchen. Margaret tried not to show it, but discomfort was already evident in her eyes. Even so, Andrew supported Logan in whatever he could, because he would never stop loving that restless son who seemed to want to embrace the whole world. The following years were a mix of achievements and tensions. Michael married Samantha, a young nurse he met at the local hospital when he took Andrew there for a migraine treatment. Samantha charmed the family with her kindness and dedication. Meanwhile, Logan began to drift away. He no longer showed up at family gatherings and avoided talking about work. He always spoke of grand plans, but revealed little about the details. Andrew suspected his older son was getting involved in shady business, but he never had any solid proof. It was early spring when tragedy struck the family for good. Andrew suffered a massive heart attack while returning from a trip. He still managed to pull the truck onto the shoulder and call for help on the radio, but he didn't survive. The news hit like a storm of sadness. Upon hearing of her husband's death, Margaret fainted. Michael, in shock, held his mother in his arms while trying to process that irreparable loss. Logan appeared almost at nightfall, looking grim but showing no deep emotion. He seemed more concerned about his father's than sharing in the grief. Reading the will was simple, as Andrew did not own much beyond his fleet of trucks. The company, though small, was worth a significant sum and was equally divided among Margaret, Michael, and Logan. The mother, shaken and unable to work, would receive monthly support from the trucking business. The remainder of the estate was split evenly between the brothers. Michael discussed how they should proceed with Samantha. "We need to take care of my mom," Michael said, tears in his eyes. "I won't leave her alone right now. We'll reorganize everything. I have to honor what my father built." Samantha, gently caressing her husband's face, said, "You're not alone in this. Count on me for everything, Michael." Logan, in turn, became more and more distant, saying he was overloaded with commitments and market studies. He only showed up at the house when it was necessary to sign some document. Margaret, battling anxiety due to her husband's sudden death, was soon diagnosed with a stroke that compromised part of her motor coordination and speech. Michael did not hesitate to use his entire share of the inheritance for the medical care his mother needed. He sold 2 of the trucks he had inherited, keeping only one so he could continue working and at least have a basic financial flow. To make matters worse, Samantha began experiencing persistent body aches. Worried, she decided to see doctors in Phoenix and, to everyone's despair, was diagnosed with a rare form of cancer. She would need an intense and expensive treatment. Once again, Michael didn't hesitate. He spent whatever was left of his savings on hospital stays and medication. Even so, he tried to find the strength to drive his truck across the roads, as that was the only source of income to cover the endless bills. During that dark period, Logan seldom appeared. He sent short messages, always citing urgent obligations. He promised financial help, but never actually deposited the amounts he had pledged. One especially difficult night, Michael had to rush Samantha to the emergency room after she developed a very high fever. While waiting for test results, he called Logan, asking for any kind of support, but the call went to voicemail. Sitting in the cold, white hospital corridor, Michael spoke softly to Samantha. "I don't want to lose you. You mean everything to me, and I need my mom to get better too. We need peace in this family." Samantha, trying to show courage, forced a smile. "We'll get through this together. Don't worry about that now. Focus on taking care of her." 2 days turned into weeks, then into months. Weak and needing constant care, Margaret required around-the-clock supervision. Samantha endured cycles of chemotherapy, suffering debilitating side effects. Michael slept very little, splitting his time between his mother's hospital and Samantha's, along with freight jobs and whatever spare hours he could find. To him, there was no alternative. It was the only way to keep the bills under control. Whatever remained of the inheritance was quickly used up because health insurance did not cover all necessary procedures. Michael stood still before his mother's casket, feeling like the world around him had become a shapeless mass of voices and meaningless gestures. The funeral took place in a simple chapel in town, with only a few people gathered to say goodbye to Margaret. She had always been a woman with a generous heart, despite living a humble life. Some neighbors brought flowers hastily picked from their own gardens, while the local reverend tried to offer words of comfort. The Arizona heat seemed to intensify during those dark hours, making the air denser and more suffocating with every breath. In the wooden pews, Samantha, already weakened by her treatment, struggled to give Michael some support. He, in turn, tried to hold back his tears while holding little Sophia in his arms. The girl, still too young to understand the sadness around her, gnawed on a pacifier and stretched out her restless arms, perhaps puzzled by so many teary eyes. The child's cries sounded almost like a reminder that life needed to go on, even when everything seemed to be falling apart. When the casket was carried to the hearse, Michael felt a pain in his chest so intense that it nearly stopped him from breathing. It was as if his mother's departure awakened unavoidable memories. The times she consoled him after some childhood injury, or the nights she lulled him with gentle lullabies. Simply knowing he would never again receive her loving smile left him immersed in loneliness. Logan did not show up to the service. He claimed he had important commitments in a terse, brief message with no mention of condolences. Michael had insisted his brother at least come to say goodbye to their mother, but all he got in return was, "I can't change my schedule now." It hurt more than he liked to admit. People in the chapel asked where Margaret's other son was, but Michael avoided an explanation. Changing the subject was easier than facing the disappointment. After the burial, Michael returned home with Samantha and their daughter, trying to reestablish some sort of routine. There were unpaid bills, memories scattered around the rooms, and a growing sorrow every time he passed by his mother's bedroom. Her medicine and photos were still there, everything signaling a presence that no longer existed. Samantha, noticing the extent of her husband's grief, came over and touched his face gently. "I'm here, Michael. You're not alone," she said, her voice shaky. "We'll get through this together." He hugged her carefully, feeling how thin she had become. The cancer was progressing, and successive chemotherapy sessions had left Samantha fragile. Even so, she tried to maintain some semblance of hope, however small. Michael felt guilty for relying on her in that moment of pain. So many times Samantha had needed support, and now he was the one falling apart. Still holding Sophia, he tried to smile, but tears once again fell silently. A few days later, Samantha had a severe episode of fever and excruciating pain. Michael took her to their usual hospital, where nurses already recognized him in the corridors. The team noticed her condition had worsened, and tests showed that the treatment was not having the desired effect. Sitting on a narrow chair beside her bed, he held her hand, feeling how frail she was and how cold her skin felt. Whenever Samantha opened her eyes, she tried to speak, but she was too weak and her words came out in fragmented whispers. "Don't want you to give up," she murmured, evidently fighting to stay conscious. "We have to keep believing," Michael nodded, wiping his face with his shirt sleeve. All he had left was the faith that, somehow, everything they were going through would not be in vain. The next day, he called Logan again, this time pleading for financial help to afford a new type of experimental medication. The phone rang repeatedly with no answer. Eventually, an automated message informed him that the line was temporarily unavailable. Michael felt anger and despair rising within him, but he couldn't afford to waste time. Samantha needed him there, strong, even if his legs were trembling and his heart felt shattered. As the week went on, Samantha's health deteriorated. Her remaining energy dwindled, and doctors began palliative care to ease her pain. One afternoon, when the sun was nearly blinding anyone who dared walk the streets, Michael received the final news. There was nothing more they could do besides keep her comfortable. He realized he had to be strong, because Sophia had barely started her life and was already about to lose her mother. That same night, Samantha, in a moment of clarity, called Michael to her bedside. The little girl slept in a makeshift crib in the hospital room, while the heart monitor beeped continuously. "You will be a wonderful father. Take care of our daughter, and never lose faith." Her voice came out in a trembling whisper, and a tear slid down the corner of her eye. Michael tried to respond, but no sound left his mouth. He held Samantha's hand against his chest, silently indicating he would keep that promise. Her eyes closed shortly after, and a few hours later, she was gone. The room sank into a silence that seemed to swallow everything around it. Not even Sophia's crying broke through that sense of absolute emptiness. Samantha's funeral was even more modest than Margaret's, as most of Michael's savings had been used up on treatments. Some nurses from the hospital showed up and laid simple flowers on her casket. Two of Samantha's friends came to offer condolences, recalling how kind and dedicated she had been. Michael remained silent most of the time, holding Sophia close to his chest as if she were his only reason to keep going. After another farewell, he went back to a house that now felt immense and lifeless. In every corner, there were traces of Samantha. The colorful blanket on the couch, notes about her nursing routines, the dress she had worn last Christmas. Michael wanted to throw everything away, because each object only made his longing worse. But he ended up packing them in boxes, believing that one day he would need those memories to show Sophia who her mother had been. From that point on, the days took on a heavy mechanical rhythm. Michael needed to juggle trucking routes with caring for his daughter. A retired neighbor, Mrs. Beckman, offered to look after Sophia while he was on the road. It was an invaluable help, although it hurt him to leave such a small child under someone else's care. Still, he had no choice. The hospital bills kept coming, and a mountain of expenses weighed on his shoulders. He was determined to pay every debt, seeing it as a way of honoring Samantha's memory. Logan remained out of reach, embroiled in meetings and unknown ventures. From time to time, rumors reached the small town that he was signing contracts with companies transporting chemical materials or something similar, but almost no one knew the specifics. Michael tried not to let anger consume him. Whenever he felt resentment rising, he looked at Sophia and found the strength to keep going. It was in the truck cabin that he suffered the most. In the lonely early hours, driving along Arizona highways, Michael cried uncontrollably. Sometimes he thought of his mother, Margaret, waving from the porch. Other times, he heard Samantha's laughter from when he told silly jokes to distract her from the illness. But now, everything was silent. The constant hum of the engine was his only companion, along with the headlights cutting through the darkness. One night, parked at a gas station near the New Mexico border, Michael stepped out of the cab to stretch his legs and ended up sitting on the curb, staring at the starry sky. He prayed softly, asking for strength to continue and to raise his daughter with dignity. No immediate sign from above comforted him, but breathing in the night air, cool and calm, brought him a brief feeling that there was still a road ahead. Despite everything, a new beginning was possible, even though he had no idea how or when it would happen. Day by day, the fatigue built up. Unable to afford full-time daycare or a professional nanny, and unwilling to overburden Mrs. Beckman, he started choosing less grueling routes. That meant earning less money, but at least he could get home more often to put Sophia to bed. When he held her, inhaling that baby scent of milk and soap, he was reminded that this helpless little life now depended entirely on him. Amid overdue bills and ever-present grief, Michael realized that the only way to survive was to maintain an organized routine. He put up a board on the kitchen wall, listing his scheduled trips, expenses, and Sophia's pediatric appointments. Gradually, he tried to apply the mechanical lessons he had learned from his father, repairing his own truck to save money. It was hard work, but he felt that if he remained honest and persistent, he could at least provide the basics. Now, with no mother and no wife, he clung to his memories and Sophia's future as his only source of hope. Andrew's small trucking company was practically gone, as Michael had sold almost all the trucks to cover medical expenses, keeping only his old truck, which he called his faithful companion. In the few spare moments he had, he closed his eyes and sought a moment of peace, recalling Samantha's words, "Never lose faith." As weeks turned into months, his anguish morphed into a kind of quiet determination. Michael no longer cried with the same intensity as before, but the emptiness remained. In brief chats with a neighbor, he confided that sometimes he forgot Samantha was gone. In the morning, upon waking, he would instinctively look for her around the house, as if she were still making coffee or changing Sophia's diaper. It was hard to face the reality that confronted him day after day. Logan's silence was deafening. No phone calls, no visits, no bank transfers that might have eased his financial burden. Michael tried not to harbor hatred. In a way, he understood that his brother had always sought a different path, but he couldn't help the surge of bitterness when he looked at his home's worn walls or at the leftover medication in Samantha's drawer. If Logan had so much money, why not help? One afternoon, with the temperature soaring above 100 degrees Fahrenheit, Michael had to stop his truck at a roadside shop to replace the radiator. He paid for the repair with a nearly maxed-out credit card. Sitting on a makeshift wooden bench, he stared at the blazing desert sun, realizing there was no escape from his reality. He had to be strong for his daughter and somehow find a way forward. As much as his grief bled with each memory, life demanded action, and little Sophia needed a steady father. And so Michael continued driving his old truck across Arizona, fighting against pain, adversity, and loneliness. He tried to gather what was left of a family that had fallen apart. Despite Logan's absence, he still believed that somehow a light would break through so much darkness. But for now, all he could do was keep driving, night after night, his face marked by longing and his soul held together by a fragile thread of hope. Michael did not expect to see Logan's name flash on his phone screen. They had barely exchanged more than a few brief messages in recent months, most of them ignored by his older brother. It was a stifling afternoon in Arizona, and Michael was sweating as he tried to fix a problem in the engine of his old truck parked in front of his house. The presence of his daughter Sophia, who was playing on the ground with a colorful ball, was the only thing that eased his exhaustion. When the shrill ring of his phone cut through the air, he dropped his tools onto the hot asphalt and answered. Michael frowned when he saw Logan's name. He knew his brother had become a successful entrepreneur in some murky industry, frequently mentioned in local papers, citing hefty deals and partnerships with mysterious investors. Even so, he couldn't figure out why Logan was calling, after being absent for so long. He took a deep breath before he picked up, aware that any conversation with Logan often came with tension and veiled accusations. "Logan," he said hesitantly. "Michael, were you?" At home, he glanced at Sophia, still laughing at her toy, unaware of her father's worries. "Is everything okay?" On the other end, Logan's voice was sharp. It was as if there was no time for any family consideration. "I need a favor, or, more accurately, an opportunity for you." "What do you mean? Are you talking about work?" "Exactly. I need an experienced truck driver to transport a high-value load, but I can't afford delays or screw-ups. We need someone who sticks to the schedule. And you, after all, are punctual and a good driver." Michael remained silent for a few moments, thinking about the irony of the situation. Logan, who hadn't even shown up for Margaret's funeral and hadn't lifted a finger to help with Samantha's medical expenses, was now calling with a job offer. Even so, the need was urgent. The bills were piling up, and he knew that any well-paid haul could make the difference in keeping his debts under control and ensuring diapers, milk, and at least minimal comfort for Sophia. "I'm available, but—" he hesitated, wondering if it was worth mentioning their recent disagreements. Maybe it was better to let it go, since arguing wouldn't help. "What's the route? And when do I start?" Logan was direct. "It's a long route. Leaves Phoenix, crosses part of Arizona, and goes all the way to California. We need the cargo delivered in record time. No delays, no excuses. And I insist it be done without unnecessary stops. The client is demanding and won't tolerate mistakes." "Got it." Michael nodded, though Logan couldn't see him on the other end of the line. He tried to ask about the type of cargo, but his brother quickly changed the subject. "Come to my office tomorrow morning in downtown Phoenix. I'll give you the details in person. And don't be late. If you show up even 1 minute after 9, I'll lose the deal and you'll lose the chance to make good money." The call ended before Michael could reply. He sighed, going back to tightening the rusted nut on his truck's engine. He felt uneasy, but saw no other way. He needed the money, and Logan, apparently, was offering a generous payment. Still, something in his brother's voice and manner seemed colder than ever. The next morning, Michael left Sophia with their neighbor, Mrs. Beckman, who looked at him with a mix of curiosity and concern. "You seem tense, dear. Is everything okay?" "I'm meeting Logan. He offered me a job. I don't have a choice. I hope it works out. Be careful and call me if you need anything. I'll keep an eye on Sophia." Michael thanked her and drove to Phoenix, where he quickly noticed the stark contrast between his simple life and Logan's luxury. The office was in a sleek, modern building with mirrored glass. The receptionist led him to a spacious room overlooking skyscrapers and furnished with impeccably expensive pieces. Logan was there, wearing a tailored suit and talking on the phone with someone. He gestured for Michael to wait. Yes, close the contract at 10% above. If the supplier doesn't agree, tell them we have other interested parties, Logan said firmly, as if there were no room for negotiation. Great, then keep me updated. Hanging up, he looked Michael up and down. The difference between the two brothers was glaring. Michael was wearing worn-out jeans and a shirt already stained with oil. He looked tired, almost out of place in that cold environment. Logan remained standing, pointing to a stiff-backed chair. Sit. We don't have much time. A contract lay on the table along with a route schedule. Logan slid the papers toward Michael, not even offering him coffee or a welcoming smile. These are the instructions. You'll take this shipment to Los Angeles. I need you to complete the delivery quickly, with no excuses. If you miss the deadline, you'll pay a penalty. And don't worry, the cargo is legalized. Michael noticed a slight hesitation in his brother's voice when he said legalized. He wasn't sure if it was just his impression, but he felt Logan wasn't being entirely transparent. Still, given his financial struggles, he chose not to ask questions right then. He studied the document closely and saw that the payment was, in fact, much higher than what he usually earned on typical contracts. It was a small fortune for someone in his situation, enough to settle part of his debts and still create a small emergency fund for his daughter. I'll need an advance, Michael said, trying not to feel embarrassed. I need to buy new tires and get the truck serviced before hitting the road. It's a long trip. Logan sighed impatiently. Paying you in advance is a risk for me, but under the circumstances, I'll consider it. I'll have my accountant deposit half the amount, but you have to sign the clause that releases me from liability if there are delays or complications. The risk is all yours. Got it. Even though he was uncomfortable, Michael agreed. He needed this job. He had promised himself he would take care of Sophia and that no sacrifice would be too great. After signing the papers, he got up, but Logan didn't end the conversation. On the contrary, he raised his voice so everyone in the office could hear. You and I have a deadline, clear? You're not going to embarrass me in front of my partners. If anything goes wrong, I'm the one who will face the consequences with them. And don't expect any special treatment because we're brothers. If you fail, you'll answer for it in court. Logan's tone sounded like a threat, and the employees walking by exchanged uneasy glances. Michael felt humiliated. The way Logan was berating him in front of executives and secretaries hurt his pride. He swallowed hard and stuffed the papers into his backpack without saying a word. He knew arguing or lashing out wouldn't improve his situation, so he just nodded and left, trying not to show how shaken he was. On his way out, he walked to the main corridor and heard people whispering. He could feel the critical stares of those in expensive clothes. He saw the contempt on the faces of some who knew he was just a truck driver with troubles, while Logan, the business star, was treated with reverence. It looked like publicly humiliating his brother was Logan's way of reaffirming his own power. Michael, however, had no time to brood over it. He needed to finish servicing his truck, buy the tires, and hit the road as soon as possible. When he got home, he received good news that the deposit had been made. He probably bought everything needed to get the truck ready for the trip to California. New tires, oil check, brake inspection. Everything done in a rush with the help of an old local mechanic who sympathized with Michael's life story. Night fell, bringing slightly cooler air, and Michael picked up Sophia, watching her sleep as he felt a tightness in his chest. He would need to leave before dawn. The next day, as the first glimmer of light broke through the desert's orange sky, Michael said goodbye to his daughter and Mrs. Beckman, loading his gear into the truck. His chest felt the tension of the short deadline, Logan's threats, and the coldness in his brother's eyes. But he was also determined. He needed the money and took pride in his work. He had no intention of failing. The trip began relatively well. The truck ran better after the repairs, and Michael stayed on the interstate, keeping to the speed limit and stopping only as much as his body required. However, at a routine checkpoint, he felt his heart race. The officers inspected his vehicle and cargo documents. He had the paperwork Logan had provided, but it was clear one of the officers was carefully examining the sealed barrels, probably suspicious about their contents. In the end, the officer handed the documents back without comment, allowing him to proceed. Still, the officer's concerned expression remained in Michael's mind. Back on the road, Michael couldn't shake the idea that there might be something illegal about that cargo. He had to take a deep breath and focus on driving. Any delay or unnecessary stop could cost him the deadline. Besides, if he openly questioned the cargo's legitimacy, he might lose his only chance to pay his bills. Despite his misgivings, he tried to keep his mind on the task at hand. The next few miles were grueling. Arizona's stifling heat gave way to a dry wind in the mountainous region, forcing him to drive with extra caution. Whenever he stopped to refuel, Michael checked the time, recalling Logan's words, "No delays or there will be a penalty." Taking more than a 10-minute break made him anxious. About halfway along the route, the weather started to change. Dark clouds gathered overhead, signaling a storm. The rain started gently, but soon turned into a downpour that greatly reduced visibility. The slippery roads and sharp turns made driving dangerous, yet Michael couldn't stop. Logan's pressure haunted him like a specter. At one point, lightning flashed across the sky, lighting everything up for a split second. The thunder that followed was so loud Michael felt the steering wheel vibrate in his hands. With new tires, the truck still had decent grip, but visibility was almost zero. He took shelter under a makeshift canopy at a partially closed station, but only long enough to steady his breathing and check his phone signal. 2 messages from Logan were on the screen. "Have you passed Flagstaff yet? I won't tolerate delays. Move faster." Michael's blood boiled. He was risking his life in that storm, yet all Logan showed was impatience and coldness. Even so, he took a deep breath, ignored his anger, and got back on the road. He had to finish this haul. Pushing on through darkness and pouring rain, he lost about an hour before finding better driving conditions. When the storm finally began to ease, he checked his watch and saw he was on the edge of his schedule. He was nearly at the highway leading to the Los Angeles metropolitan area, and from there he would face an urban stretch that might be even more complicated, depending on traffic. Exhausted, tense, and hungry, he pressed on. As he approached the final address, he felt his phone vibrate again. He answered while keeping one hand on the wheel and the other firmly on the truck controls. "Yeah," Michael said tersely. "Where are you?" Logan's voice was impatient. "You're running late. I'm about 20 minutes away at most. I hit a serious storm on the road. I told you, no excuses. The client is already complaining. You think I can tell them there was rain? He wants the cargo now." "At his limit," Michael replied. "I'm almost there. I've taken plenty of risks to stick to the deadline. You could at least ask if I'm okay after driving through that storm." "I'm not paying you to be okay, Michael. I'm paying you to deliver. And in case you forgot, this is serious business." The call ended abruptly. Michael felt bitterness rise in his throat, a mix of fatigue, hunger, and indignation. There was no time to argue further. He had to arrive and finish the job. After navigating heavy traffic, He finally saw the warehouse listed in the contract. It was a simple building with large gates. 3 grim-faced men waited outside. One of them was on his phone and appeared frustrated. As soon as Michael parked, he climbed out of the truck with his paperwork. One of the men spoke curtly. "What took you so long? We're wasting time. Unload it already." Michael swallowed his anger and followed their instructions. He helped open the compartment and checked the sealed barrels. The men inspected the cargo and seemed satisfied. Then one of them signed a receipt. While he was doing so, Michael's phone rang again. It was Logan. He answered silently. "They told me you arrived. I hope everything's in order." "It's delivered, Logan." Michael tried to sound calm. "Can I know when I'll get the rest of my payment?" "It'll be in your account, but not today. It depends on the client's transfer. You only get paid after I get paid. And if there's any problem, the contractual penalty still applies." Michael tried to argue, but knew it was useless. He hung up, put his phone away, and took a deep breath. He knew if he pushed it, he'd lose his temper. He still needed that money, so he decided to stay composed. Even so, the humiliation still stung. He had done the job, risked his life in the storm, endured Logan's indifference, and now faced uncertainty about when he would actually receive payment. As the men finished unloading the last of the cargo, Michael stowed the delivery slips and climbed back into the cab, his body aching all over. More than anything, he needed rest. Maybe he could find a nearby gas station to sleep for a few hours, since he wasn't fit to drive back to Arizona just yet. Before he drove off, though, he heard one of the men, a tall, stern-faced guy, talking on the phone with someone. The words got lost in the noise of the warehouse, but Michael noticed the man's tense expression. There was something odd about the way they were handling the containers. Through a small gap in the truck's rear view, he saw them opening one of the drums. A dark liquid flowed out, releasing a strong chemical odor. The label didn't look official. All of it reinforced the suspicions that had bothered Michael from the start. But if he wanted to get paid, he couldn't just walk away and report them. He had no proof, and his financial situation wouldn't allow for lawsuits or dealing with retaliation. He took a deep breath, started the engine, and drove off, trying to forget what he'd seen. Deep down, he knew Logan was involved in something far more dangerous than he was letting on. As he slowly made his way through the city streets, he watched the distant lights of Los Angeles through his dirty windshield. At another time, he might have admired the grandeur of the skyscrapers, but in that moment, he only felt a sour taste in his soul. He'd been humiliated in front of executives, treated as disposable by the one who should have been his life partner, his own brother. Now he was left to his own devices, with an old truck and the burden of a questionable cargo on his conscience. Tired, he parked in a safe spot and closed his eyes. He needed sleep before facing the road. He had to be in one piece for Sophia. Despite his anger, he promised himself he wouldn't let it corrupt him. He wanted the money to pay his bills and move forward, but he wouldn't sell his dignity for any amount. And every time he thought of Logan's arrogant look, he felt an even stronger urge to cut any professional ties between them once and for all. He still had a long trip home, on the road and in his own life, but Michael clung to the certainty that his honesty was his most valuable possession. Although humiliated, he would try to keep from being contaminated by the greed and coldness that now seemed to rule Logan's world. At that moment, as he closed his eyes for a few moments, all he wanted was to get home, hold his daughter, and remember that despite all the obstacles, his love for her and Samantha's memory were forces money could never buy. Michael decided to set off at dusk, hoping to avoid the worst of the big highway's traffic. It wasn't the first time he'd chosen to travel at that hour, but he felt a different sense of foreboding that night. Maybe it was the piled-up exhaustion from so many intense days, or the painful memory of the humiliation he'd suffered working for Logan. Either way, he had no choice. He had to keep the truck wheels turning to pay the bills and provide for little Sophia. As he crossed Arizona's roads, the dry heat started to give way to a heavy, almost suffocating atmosphere. Dark clouds were forming in the sky, signaling that a storm could break out at any moment. The wind was picking up, rattling the truck's cabin, and lightning flashed in the distance, lighting up the barren landscape in frightening bursts. Michael considered stopping at a station before the rain hit, but he was on a tight deadline for this new haul. He had to arrive on time. The first raindrops tapped on the windshield, lightly at first, but quickly increasing in frequency. In less than 15 minutes, it became a downpour. The roar on the truck's metal roof was deafening, and lightning zigzagged across the sky, throwing eerie flashes onto the road. Visibility dropped sharply, forcing him to slow down. At every turn, his heart raced, fearful that the water pooling on the road could make him lose control. While driving, carefully watching for any sign of danger, Michael noticed something unusual up ahead. The headlights of a car stopped on the shoulder, flashing repeatedly. He slowed down further to assess the situation. The car's yellow hazard lights seemed to be signaling for help. From inside his cab, he could make out only the silhouette of a sporty vehicle, low and sleek, clearly not suited to such extreme weather. Michael thought twice about stopping. He was pressed for time himself, racing against the clock. But his sense of compassion won out. If that driver was in trouble, leaving them there could expose them to even greater risks. Memories of his own struggle-filled life pushed him to do the right thing. He pulled his truck over, feeling the wind rocking the metal frame. He turned off the engine and grabbed the rainproof poncho he kept behind his seat. The noise of the rain was so loud he could hardly hear his own thoughts. Stepping outside, the cold water hit him like a punch, soaking him in seconds. Still, he waved to whoever was in the car. "Hey, do you need help?" The car door opened, revealing a woman with a worried expression. Rain pelted her face, and Michael noticed she was trembling from cold and anxiety. She tried to shout something, but her voice was nearly drowned out by thunder. "I can't get the car to start. It's making a weird sound. I tried calling my insurance, but I have no phone signal here," she yelled, raising her voice to be heard. Michael moved closer, his clothes weighing him down in the downpour. He had to shield his eyes from the rain with his hand just to see clearly. "Stay calm. We can try pushing the car closer to my truck. It's taller and has a bit of cover. That way I can see what's wrong with the engine. But you'll get sick out here in the rain. You can wait in the truck cab while I try to figure it out." She hesitated a moment, as if unwilling to leave her car behind, but eventually agreed, defeated by the cold that was making her shake. Michael opened the truck door so she could climb in, showing her where there was an old towel and a blanket. Though shy, she thanked him with a silent nod and got in, relieved to find a dry place to take shelter. Michael then tried to start the car himself to pinpoint the problem, but the engine wouldn't show any sign of life, only a repetitive clicking noise. With the hood open and the storm still raging, he knelt down, feeling around the parts and wiring, using his phone's flashlight. Water trickled down his face, dripping from his chin and making it hard to focus. It wasn't an easy fix, especially not in the middle of a storm without proper tools. Even so, Michael refused to give up. He pulled a small flashlight from his first aid kit and inspected the belt's battery and alternator. After many minutes in the rain, he managed to stabilize a few loose parts. His hands felt numb, and his body was trembling from the icy wind. Finally, closing the hood, he tried the ignition once more. The engine sputtered weakly, but it caught. Michael gave a tired smile. He shut it off right away to avoid straining any damaged parts. He put away his flashlight and hurried back to the truck cab, almost tripping in a puddle near the roadside. Once inside, he took off the soaked poncho and tossed it aside. It was colder in here than before, but better than outside in the driving rain. The woman looked at him with concern. "My goodness, you're soaked. Sit down. I'll get the blanket for you, too. I don't want you getting sick. I'm so sorry for causing you so much trouble." "You don't have to apologize, ma'am. These things happen, especially with a car like yours, which doesn't look very storm-friendly," he said, giving a small smile, trying to ease her tension. I'm Michael, by the way. She returned the smile, though she still looked worried. Nice to meet you. I'm Helena. Thank you so much for stopping to help me. Honestly, if it weren't for you, I'd be stuck here at the mercy of this storm. I thought nobody would stop. Michael started sneezing, a clear sign his body was reacting to the sudden temperature drop. Sorry, I guess I could use a hot shower soon, he joked, trying to keep the mood light. I managed a temporary fix on the engine, but I'm not sure how long it'll hold up. I tested it, and it turns over, but I recommend taking it to a mechanic as soon as possible. Helena glanced out the fogged-up window, watching lightning continue to slice the dark sky. She sighed. I had no idea I'd run into a storm like this. I came from another region, and it was all dry. I need to get to Flagstaff, but now I'm afraid to keep going. What do you think I should do? Michael thought it over. He felt exhausted after all the stress, but he could see how scared she was. Well, if you want to follow me to the next station, I can drive behind you in my truck. That way, if your car dies again, we'll be able to pull over safely. Once we're there, we can call for help or get a tow. We can't just stay here in this storm. It's too risky. She nodded, grateful for his kindness. She tried to offer him some money for his help, taking out a few bills from her purse, but Michael immediately raised his hands in refusal. I didn't do it for the money, believe me. Helping someone in need is the least any of us can do. Please don't feel obligated to pay me. Helena's eyes welled up, and she blinked a few times to contain the emotion she felt. She hadn't expected such generosity from a stranger, especially under such harsh conditions. She put the money back in her purse, unsure what to say. Sensing the moment, Michael just gave a slight smile. If you're ready, we should get moving. The rain doesn't look like it's letting up anytime soon. They ran out into the rain, heading for Helena's car. She settled into the driver's seat, and Michael returned to his truck, settling behind the wheel, turning on his high beams. He signaled for her to go ahead. She started the engine, which still sounded weak, but it ran. Together, they braved the dark road, lit now and then by bursts of lightning. Despite the danger, they reached the station Michael had mentioned. It was a simple place, but it had a canopy and a neon sign indicating there was a 24-hour diner. Helena parked her car, breathing a sigh of relief. She got out, greeted again by the unrelenting sound of the rain, but at least she now had some shelter. Michael parked his truck nearby and climbed down, looking worried. You'd better rest a bit, warm up, and try to make a phone call. Maybe you should get a tow. I doubt your car will handle much more if this weather keeps up. She nodded, casting him a grateful look. Please, at least let me buy you a coffee, something warm. You did so much for me. Once again, Michael gently refused, even though his stomach rumbled quietly at that moment. With the rush of the trip, he hadn't had time to eat properly. Courtesy, however, spoke louder. Don't worry about me. I'm used to storms and roads. They're part of my life. I'm glad you're okay. If you need anything, just let me know. I'll be resting in my truck. Tomorrow morning, I'll be on my way. She looked at the dark sky, as if still unable to believe someone had been willing to help her so selflessly. Another gust of wind blew, and she quickly pulled her coat closed. At that exact moment, thunder boomed, making them both jump a bit. Thank you, Michael, Helena repeated firmly. I won't forget what you did for me. He just smiled, nodding slightly before heading back into the truck. Inside, while drying off as best he could, he felt a strange peace. Despite all his fatigue, the rain, and the uncertainty awaiting him, knowing he had helped someone comforted him. He thought of Sophia, of Samantha, and of how he had always stood up for honesty and caring for others. He had just proven to himself that even amid personal storms, he was still capable of lending a hand to someone in need. Meanwhile, Helena, sitting on a bench under the station's awning, was still shivering from the cold, but felt a different kind of warmth in her chest. Clutching her phone now with a signal, she called for a tow truck. As she spoke, She glanced at Michael's large, dented truck, imagining how many stories lay behind that tired yet so genuinely kind face. She had no idea who he really was, but one thing she knew for sure: people like that shouldn't be forgotten. Somehow, she would find a way to repay him. After all, that torrential rain couldn't hide the light he had shown her. Michael returned from California with his mind full of concerns. He had delivered the mysterious cargo that Logan demanded on time, even though he suspected there was something illegal behind the operation. His payment finally came through, but with it, he realized he would no longer accept any jobs from his brother. All the tension, from the suspicious paperwork to the insane deadlines Logan imposed, along with how coldly Logan had treated him, left a bitter taste. It went against his values, and he refused to stay involved in something so murky. On the night he arrived back in Arizona, he went straight to pick up his daughter, Sophia, at Mrs. Beckman's house. He found her asleep with her little arms curled up, unaware of any worries. The tenderness of that scene confirmed his need to protect her future. He whispered, "I'm here," and held her close, his heart warming as he remembered the promise he had made to himself not to stray from an honest path. He stayed up later than usual, fixing a snack and organizing his finances in an old notebook, listing priorities and deciding how to use the money he had just received. In the following days, Michael quietly turned down all of Logan's calls, ignoring the messages his brother sent. The mere thought of hauling those suspicious loads again made him uneasy. Instead, he went back to small, routine hauls in the area, aiming to stay closer to home. The modest income wasn't enough to cover all his debts, but at least he kept his conscience clear. He never imagined that his next defining encounter would happen at an unexpected moment. After a short trip, he parked his truck in front of a roadside diner to rest a bit and have a coffee. He set Sophia in her car seat. She was a few months older now and would sometimes join him on shorter drives. As he scrolled through his phone, checking for new freight offers, he heard brisk footsteps approaching. "Excuse me, you're Michael, right?" Michael looked up, recognizing the gentle voice. It was Helena, the same woman he had helped during that recent storm. Her hair was loose, blowing in the desert wind. She was smiling warmly, looking relieved to have finally found him. He set his coffee aside and stood up, surprised. "Helena, what are you doing here?" She seemed a little embarrassed for a moment, but quickly regained her confident air. She explained that she had seen the old truck from afar and took a chance that it might be his. Not wanting to be intrusive, but eager to thank him for the help he had given her on the road, she decided to come over. Michael felt a bit awkward, remembering how he hadn't even accepted a reward at the time. "That wasn't necessary. It was just a favor," he said, shrugging. "Anyone would have done the same. I was just lucky to drive by." Helena frowned, somewhat doubtful. "I'm not sure anyone would have stayed out in that torrential storm, getting soaked just to fix a stranger's car. Most people would have driven on. You didn't, and I owe you. I'd like to talk about it, if that's all right." Michael shrugged again, but agreed to listen. They ordered 2 coffees and sat at a corner table, where they could keep an eye on Sophia, who was sleeping peacefully in her portable crib. Helena, watching the child, seemed touched. Michael noticed the genuine warmth in her eyes as she looked at his daughter. "You have a beautiful little girl." "Thanks, but honestly it's difficult raising her alone," he admitted, lowering his gaze to his coffee cup. "I don't really have a choice, though. I'm a widower, and I need to provide the best I can for her. She's the reason I keep pushing forward. Sometimes it's really tough, but we do our best to stay strong." Helena nodded, showing empathy for his situation. She took a sip of coffee and, after a brief hesitation, revealed the real reason she had sought him out. She explained that she was expanding her business in the logistics sector and had just acquired a struggling transport company. She needed someone trustworthy to manage it, someone who understood routes, truck maintenance, and above all, could handle a team with honesty and responsibility. "And that's where you come in," Helena said, sitting up straighter. "I saw the way you handle yourself. I saw your courage and how selfless you were when you helped me. I'm not interested in whether you have fancy degrees. I see integrity in you, and that's rare. I'd like to invite you to run this transport company. If you're interested." Michael was stunned by the offer. For the past few months, he had settled into being a freelance trucker with no big prospects. Suddenly, this woman he barely knew was offering him a position of trust in a larger company. "But why me?" he asked, feeling insecure. "I don't have an impressive resume or influential connections, and I hardly know your company." Helena gave an encouraging smile. "I don't know it well either. I just bought it and have already found several internal issues. Unhappy employees, poorly planned routes, trucks in terrible shape. But most of all, I noticed its biggest flaw is the lack of a leader who truly cares. When fate brought me to you in that storm, I couldn't ignore the feeling that I was seeing someone with solid principles and determination. Sometimes we need more than resumes. We need values. I learned that from my father, and I've applied it in my businesses." Though honored, Michael hesitated. He explained that he had a young daughter and wasn't sure he could juggle management responsibilities with caring for her. He also mentioned his overdue bills and his fear of failing in such a demanding role. But Helena stood firm, promising to help him develop a plan that would allow flexible hours so he could be near Sophia. She also offered a starting salary that would comfortably cover his urgent expenses. "Give yourself a chance," she said, extending her hand. "You won't be alone in this. I'll provide advisors to help with legal and administrative aspects. It's not just a favor to me. It's also for you and your daughter. If this works out, a lot could change for both of us. I saw your dedication to doing what's right, even under pressure. That's exactly the kind of behavior I need to bring to this new business. Picture a whole team guided by a leader who serves, working with ethics, commitment, and dedication." Helena's genuine approach deeply moved Michael. He asked for a few days to think it over, wanting to imagine what day-to-day life would be like. Talk with Mrs. Beckman about possibly watching Sophia a few extra hours. He needed time to weigh the pros and cons thoughts of Logan and his pursuit of quick profit without caring for anyone provided a stark contrast. Here was Helena, practically a stranger, giving him a chance for growth rooted in trust and honesty. After nights of reflection and conversations with himself, Michael decided to take the risk. He called Helena and told her his decision, voice trembling slightly with uncertainty. She reacted with enthusiasm and promptly scheduled a meeting at the transport company's temporary office. His first visit to the site confirmed what Helena had said. The company was in shambles. The trucks were old and poorly maintained, the staff had no motivation, and rumors circulated that the company was beyond saving. Yet Michael saw that if he had the freedom to make changes, he could turn things around. He remembered how his father, Andrew, took care of every detail in his own small fleet, prioritizing safety and good relationships with employees. "We'll need a complete overhaul of the vehicles," Michael said as they walked through the yard, inspecting one of the idle trucks. "Oil changes, new tires, safety checks, everything. We also have to reorganize the routes, because there are some stretches that are too long, they just cost money, and put the crews at risk. We need the courage to be selective about the products we haul. That might reduce some contracts at first, but soon we'll earn credibility and attract partners who value good business practices. One more thing. Cutting down on accidents will be our top priority in operations." Helena wrote everything down in a small notebook, looking pleased to see that he truly understood the business. When she introduced him to the team, some employees eyed him with skepticism, aware that the company was on the brink. But Michael's calm demeanor, asking each person about their challenges, started to break through that initial doubt. He promised to address the most pressing issues, making it clear he wasn't just the owner's representative, but someone who had lived this line of work his whole life. He shared stories of his father's struggles, proving he understood the pain, difficulties, and needs of this profession. The following weeks were intense. Michael divided his time between family responsibilities and revamping the transport company. He created a detailed report of the routes, negotiated with suppliers for replacement parts, and held regular team meetings. Little by little, the atmosphere improved, and skepticism gave way to renewed hope. Some of the more experienced drivers offered to help with mechanical repairs on their own time, and Helena, listening closely to Michael's suggestions, invested in proper truck maintenance. In parallel with the hectic schedule, Michael and Helena started speaking more often, exchanging ideas and mapping out future plans. At times, their conversations went beyond professional, with each sharing brief personal details. He talked about how hard it was raising Sophia without her mother, and she confided that, despite her success, she too had faced losses and disappointments. There was mutual respect and admiration, though neither wanted to rush what was naturally unfolding. Over time, positive results emerged. In just a few months, the transport company no longer operated at a loss and began winning new contracts and reclaiming old ones, thanks to better logistics and more attentive customer service that Michael had implemented. Employees, once discouraged, now took pride in being part of the turnaround. Helena watched it all with a mix of surprise and gratitude, growing more convinced she had placed her trust in the right person. One afternoon, after a meeting confirming their first profits, Helena invited Michael for a cup of coffee. They sat in a newly equipped meeting room, still somewhat modest, but symbolic of the company's revival. When fate brings the right people together, life can change radically, don't you think? She remarked, her eyes shining. And to think it all started because of a storm, Michael smiled, remembering how he had chosen to help her without ever imagining that simple act of kindness would lead him to a job he never thought he'd have. There was still much to be done, but for the first time in ages, he felt capable of dreaming bigger without letting go of his principles. I guess sometimes a difficult moment can show us opportunities we wouldn't have seen otherwise, he replied, looking at her gratefully. Thank you for trusting me. She smiled back with a calm expression. Beneath it all, there was a subtle sense that something beyond the professional was growing between them. With no rush, they returned to their tasks, aware that, step by step, they were building not just a stronger company, but also a relationship of respect and affection that was unlike anything they had experienced before. Now that the trucks were finally running safely and the finances were coming together, Michael ended each day exhausted yet more hopeful than ever. The transport company, once an almost certain failure, was now a business that inspired trust and secured new contracts every day. And, not knowing exactly what the future held, he pressed on, mindful of his painful past, but firmly convinced that honesty and earnest work could guide him to new roads. Logan opened the window of his luxurious office and took in the panoramic view of Phoenix. The glass tower where his company was located symbolized the success he proudly flaunted. Yet behind that glossy facade lay an empire built on questionable practices. Around the halls, employees whispered about investigations drawing ever closer, while key clients began to question the origins of the cargo Logan's trucking business was moving. Still, he remained proud and unconcerned by any sign of trouble, believing his influence would shield him from any scandal. On a sweltering morning, Logan made his way to yet another meeting with supposed foreign partners. His immaculately tailored suit contrasted with the tense look on his face. Even so, he shook hands with each potential investor, promising sky-high profits. When it was time to sign contracts, Logan sensed the tension in the air. One of the foreigners asked for more data on how certain chemical products were stored and about the federal permits. Logan evaded the questions, offering vague answers and promising to deliver the documents soon. The discomfort was clear. No signatures were made, and the investors left without much of a goodbye. Late in the day, one of his managers approached him with a worried expression. "Sir, we lost 2 more contracts. Our competitor is offering guaranteed proof of origin that we can't match." Logan threw his pen onto the table in frustration. "This is temporary. They know our company is bigger. They'll come back." The manager stood there, trying to appear confident, but struggling to reveal that inspectors had been showing up at the depots. Lately, there were rumors that adulterated products were being sold under fake labels of well-known companies. Customs had already made seizures in at least 2 states. These grim tidings only added to the other legal issues tied to Logan's name. Meanwhile, Michael was steadily advancing in the transport sector alongside Helena. While her company prospered because of honesty and genuine concern for employees, Logan's business was losing its good name. Contracts were vanishing. Former employees were leaking information to authorities, and the local press published headlines about tax fraud. Apparently, the political protection Logan had so often boasted of was crumbling under the pressure of federal investigations. One afternoon, Logan got a call that made his heart pound. It was an old business partner telling him the cover they provided with regulatory agencies was no longer possible. The call was quick and blunt, making it clear that no one was willing to go down with Logan. Worse still, a search and seizure warrant was executed the very next day. Agents showed up at his company, collecting computers and documents and sealing off multiple departments. Employees looked on, terrified by the thought of losing their jobs. Logan tried to manage the situation by frantically calling lawyers, powerful friends, and even politicians. All he got was evasive or non-existent answers. Panic set in when he realized his assets would also be reviewed. His lawyers tried, with little success, to get a preventive habeas corpus, but the evidence against Logan was too solid to ignore. The entire structure he had built on easy profits and illegal deals began to collapse. Around that same time, Michael, mostly unaware of the full extent of his brother's troubles, stayed focused on his honest work and the straightforward life he led. The transport company he now managed had landed new, significant clients thanks to more efficient routes and complete transparency in its operations. Some fellow truckers mentioned the investigations plaguing Logan's firm, but Michael avoided getting involved. He had already severed professional ties with his brother and felt neither anger nor pleasure in Logan's downfall. Instead, he focused on his daughter, Sophia, and the steady progress he was achieving with Helena. One evening, Michael was at home reading bedtime stories to Sophia when his phone rang from an unknown number. He hesitated before picking up, since he'd been getting many calls from new clients and logistics partners. But the voice on the other end wasn't a customer. It was Logan, breathing heavily. "Michael, I need your help." Initially, all Michael could make out were background noises, tense voices. He recognized the wail of sirens. The conversation was disjointed. Logan said he'd been stopped while leaving a commercial building and was being taken into custody. He sounded desperate, begging Michael to post bail or contact some new lawyers. But the line suddenly went dead, and Michael couldn't make sense of all the details. He was shaken, despite the distance and the old wounds. They were still brothers. He didn't wish Logan harm, but he also wasn't sure he could do anything for him at that moment. Even so, he called around to figure out what had happened, but all he heard was contradictory information. What seemed certain was that Logan was under arrest, awaiting legal procedures. His assets and bank accounts were frozen under suspicion of fraud, meaning he wouldn't be able to post a large bail. News of Logan's arrest spread through the city in just a few hours. Many who had been mistreated or ignored by him felt relief or even satisfaction, knowing that justice was finally catching up with him. Those who still depended on his company worried about their futures, aware that Logan was in no position to rescue them if he couldn't even save himself. Local media commented on his arrogance in business, pointing out the contrast between his meteoric rise and the now inevitable fall. Meanwhile, Michael remained focused on his daughter and his own work. His growing success came from solid foundations based on ethics. Little by little, he was becoming a respected figure in the industry, and the transport company he managed showed signs of lasting prosperity. It was as though the universe was acknowledging his efforts and the values he'd learned from Andrew, his late father. Drivers, mechanics, and the rest of the workforce respected him, feeling they worked for someone who saw more than just numbers, but human beings. Days later, Michael got more information about Logan. The investigation had uncovered accounting fraud, forged documents, and transportation of illegal materials. Even high-priced attorneys failed to dismiss the compelling evidence. The authorities pressed on, and Logan finally admitted he had lost all control. Behind bars, he contacted Michael again, this time more humbly, though still with traces of pride. He asked for financial support and some help fighting his legal battles. Surprised and rattled, Michael listened to the plea in silence. Even without making any immediate decision, Michael felt a tightness in his chest after hanging up the phone. It was undeniable that there was a bond of blood and shared childhood stories. He remembered when they were boys in Andrew's workshop, fighting over who would drive first. He remembered the scoldings their mother, Margaret, gave them so they wouldn't argue. And now, Logan was alone, without money or prestige, falling into the abyss of consequences he himself had created. In the end, while Logan sank under scandals and debts, Michael reaped the rewards of a clear conscience. The transport company under his management was growing more and more solid in the market, and Helena, confident, confirmed every day how right she had been to hire him. At home, Michael talked to Sophia until she fell asleep, feeling a kind of unfamiliar peace, as if after so many tragedies and humiliations, he could finally glimpse a dignified and prosperous future taking shape. Logan's downfall was just another chapter in that family story. Yet for Michael, it represented more than a simple contrast between two brothers. It reinforced a truth learned from an early age. Ambition without values may grant fleeting glory, but in the end, honesty is the only pillar capable of sustaining lasting achievements. That morning in Phoenix was especially clear when Michael received an unexpected phone call from an old lawyer who knew the family. The voice on the line was direct. Logan had served part of his sentence and, after all the legal procedures, was eligible for provisional release, subject to supervision. Michael felt his heart tighten, unsure how to react. Despite the pain caused in the past, he couldn't simply ignore the fact that his brother was leaving prison with nowhere to go and no one to turn to. At lunchtime, Helena noticed Michael's distant look as they discussed new routes for the transport company. He didn't hide the truth. He said he needed to deal with a personal matter without giving too many details. She, understanding, wished him well and offered to cover the urgent office tasks. Michael headed toward the older part of town, where there was a small support home for people leaving the prison system. That was where he would find Logan. When he arrived, he saw a low gate and a poorly maintained yard. A volunteer greeted him and told him that Logan was resting in one of the shared rooms, still getting used to being free. Michael felt odd walking down that narrow corridor with peeling walls and the smell of disinfectant in the air. He knocked lightly on the indicated door. "You can come in," came the curt reply. Opening it, he saw his brother sitting on a small single bed. Logan's beard was unkempt, dark circles sank into his eyes, and the tension of his time in confinement was etched on his face. An awkward look was inevitable. They were both silent for a few seconds until Logan lowered his head. "I didn't think you'd come. I don't even know where to start." Michael took a deep breath, feeling a mix of compassion and caution. He stepped forward slowly and extended his hand in a gesture of reconciliation. "You need help, Logan, and I'm here. Even though we've grown apart, we're still brothers." Logan shook his head, unable to hide his shame. "What I have left now is only the remains of a past full of mistakes. I lost my properties, the cars, everything. I have no idea how to start over. My reputation is ruined, and nobody wants to hire me." Michael pulled up a simple chair and sat facing his brother. He noticed Logan's worn-out clothes, nothing like the expensive suits he once wore. The downfall was harsher than he had imagined. "You know, the transport company where I work is still much smaller than your old empire. I can't offer you a life of luxury, but I can offer you honest work." Michael took his time speaking, aware of the risk he was taking by trusting Logan again. "We need someone who understands management, someone to help with administrative processes. If you're willing to start from scratch, I can try to make room for you." Logan raised his eyes, surprised. Even without showing it openly, There was a glimmer of relief there, yet he seemed hesitant. "But why would you do this for me? After everything I did, after I turned my back on you when you needed me most. Besides, to be honest, I don't know if hiring me will be good for your company's image." Michael thought of Margaret, Andrew, the pain of losing Samantha. He remembered the humiliation and the coldness of Logan, but he also recalled their childhood, sharing a bed in a cramped little room and laughing at silly jokes. "Because I believe everyone deserves a second chance. And because I have a daughter, I want to teach about family and forgiveness. It's not easy to forget the past, but maybe we can try to build something new." Michael's voice came out steady, although there was still unresolved hurt in the air. Logan lowered his head again, nodding almost timidly. 2 days later, Logan showed up at the modest headquarters of the transport company. Michael met him in the parking lot, where a few trucks were waiting for repairs. Older employees looked on with curiosity, whispering among themselves. Many knew who Logan was and what had happened with his company. The tension was obvious. "Everyone, this is my brother. He'll be helping out on the administrative side," Michael announced, without going into detail. "If anyone has questions, you can come talk to me." There was a brief silence, but then one of the drivers stepped forward and extended his hand to Logan in a welcoming gesture. That broke the ice, and the other employees, though cautious, accepted Michael's decision. Of course, nobody planned to trust Logan entirely right away, but they also didn't want to go against their boss's judgment, as they knew Michael's character. The first few days of Logan's new job were strange. Accustomed to leading large teams and signing checks for huge amounts, he now found himself in a growing business where every penny needed to be carefully allocated. He had to learn to deal with more modest spreadsheets, maintenance expenses, and direct negotiations with suppliers. With every mistake or delay, he realized he no longer had secretaries to solve his problems. One afternoon, Helena stopped by the office to check the accounts. Seeing Logan absorbed in reports, she noticed the tension in the air and his difficulty admitting he didn't fully understand the control systems. She approached him. "Are you having problems? Need help?" Logan, who once prided himself on always having the right answer, let out a sigh. I'm not sure I can do this. I don't understand why the software doesn't match my calculations. And I don't want to let you down because I really need this job." Helena guided him, showing him the basic steps and the correct way to enter expenses into the new system. For a moment, Logan felt embarrassed but also grateful. In his old companies, he simply delegated these less strategic administrative matters to advisors, always punishing any mistakes mercilessly. His former arrogance gave way to a simple realization. He needed to relearn from the beginning, without shortcuts or corruption. After a few minutes, Helena smiled. "See? It's not so complicated. It just takes patience and attention to detail." Logan didn't say much, but he nodded, sensing that humility could truly be his new path if he wanted to regain a place in Michael's life and in the working world. Weeks went by, and Logan observed the dynamic of the transport company. He noticed that Michael arrived early, rushed to organize routes, guided the drivers, and then personally checked the trucks. At night, he still found time to take care of Sophia. The little girl, for her part, would run around the yard when she came with the babysitter, and sometimes reached out her arms to Logan, unaware of the past he carried. The moment that most affected Logan occurred on a Friday after business hours. Seeing Michael inflate the tires of a vehicle scheduled to leave on Saturday, he approached to help. His brother looked up, surprised. "You don't have to do that. I can finish up here." Logan, holding the air hose, gave an almost shy smile. "If I'm going to keep working here, I want to understand everything, including how to care for the trucks, just like you do. I remember our father used to get involved in these tasks at his old transport company. You and he were always willing to do the hard work and got along well with the employees. I always felt out of place, but now I see that was my own fault. I never got involved, never helped. Maybe it's time I learned this side too." They spoke little, but there was a quiet understanding there. That evening, when the job was done, Michael offered Logan a ride, since he had no independent way of getting around. The ride to Logan's modest rented apartment took place under a coppery sunset. The silence between them wasn't awkward, but rather full of reflection. When they arrived, Logan stopped at the gate and turned to Michael. "Thank you for all of this. I know there's still a long way to go to make amends, but just being able to work honestly, not having to look over my shoulder, feels like I can breathe again. You're helping me at the time I need it the most. And I know I abandoned you when you needed me most." Michael rested his arm on the car window, studying the tired look on his brother's face. "I hope this is the start of a real new beginning. It's still hard for me to let go of what happened, but I want to believe we can move past it. I know that's what our parents would have wanted." Logan nodded, swallowing his emotion. He got out of the car without saying anything else. He watched Michael drive away, headlights on, and realized he had never valued this type of simple but honorable life before. Now he no longer had his former power or unlimited bank account. All he had left was a chance to regain the dignity he had lost. In the months that followed, Logan began building friendships with some of his coworkers. He exchanged ideas about more cost-effective routes and suggested accounting adjustments to make the most of the limited funds. The team looked at him with less suspicion, noticing he was genuinely trying to work for the company's benefit. Gradually, the typical coldness in his eyes gave way to a man who knew the pain of falling and was now striving to stand on his own 2 feet with honesty. And so, as life went on, Logan and Michael rediscovered each other as brothers not only by blood, but through their shared work routine. Every successful haul, every problem solved, every sincere conversation helped rebuild a bridge once destroyed by greed and selfishness. Even though the past could never be erased, the two of them found, day after day, a path of reconstruction, showing that sometimes humility and forgiveness are the best ways to reconnect with someone once believed lost forever. The sun rose over the Arizona desert, casting soft shadows on the wide porch of the house where Michael now lived with Helena and Sophia. That morning carried a tranquility he had rarely known in the past. The distant call of a bird and the smell of freshly brewed coffee Helena was making reminded him that life at last had taken a calmer direction. The frantic pace of before had given way to a peaceful, stable routine, born of hard work, honesty, and above all, unity. Inside the house, Helena was sorting through some papers related to the transport company they had built together. She always dressed elegantly, but carried herself with simplicity and joy, displaying the natural glow of someone who felt fulfilled both professionally and personally. Seeing her, Michael remembered how they had met by chance during a storm, and he felt grateful for everything they had built since then. Near them, Sophia was chatting happily with a few friends from her school. It was almost hard to believe that, not long ago, this family had been steeped in tragedy and uncertainty. After a few cups of coffee, Michael and Helena headed to the transport company. As they parked, they greeted employees who were already unloading trucks and organizing shipments for different states. The company had grown significantly, signing contracts with renowned businesses and maintaining a management style rooted in strong values. Michael smiled, realizing that behind the success lay the spirit of cooperation he always cherished. Here, they weren't just after instant profit. They sought satisfaction for every worker and respect for every customer. They believed they weren't merely transporting goods, but dreams and accomplishments, knowing their work was vital to the nation's economy. In the office, while organizing delivery reports, Michael got a phone call from Logan. In the past, such a call might have made him tense, but now there was calm on both ends of the line. Logan, who worked as a supervisor in another logistics sector outside the city, wanted to say he would drop by in the late afternoon to discuss something important. He had adopted new habits, far from the choices that once led him astray. Now he walked a modest but honest path, allowing himself to start anew. By dusk, the main gate opened, and Logan appeared, wearing jeans and a simple shirt, showing no hint of his old arrogance. He looked tired, yet his eyes shone with a different resolve. Michael went to greet his brother, extending a welcoming hand. "I'm glad you came. How are things in the new company?" Logan took a deep breath before answering, looking around, taking in the movement of trucks and the orderly way everything ran. "Good. I've learned more than I ever expected. For so long, I thought success was just something you measure in numbers. Now I see there's a different kind of wealth, one that doesn't vanish when the tide turns." Michael nodded, understanding that profound realization. They walked together to a covered area where some employees were taking a break. There, Logan shared his news. Soon he would be traveling to start a small specialized transport business with a reliable partner. He explained that it wouldn't be anything huge, but it was a solid, ethical step forward to keep moving ahead. Michael's eyes lit up as he listened to his brother's words, sensing the significance they carried. "I'm proud of you," Michael confessed, placing a hand on Logan's shoulder. "A lot of people, after what you went through, would have given up or fallen back into old habits. You chose the harder path, but definitely the safer one." Logan gave a touched smile. There was no need for long speeches for both to realize it was a moment of true reconciliation. The past, marked by hostility and neglect, now gave way to the essential truth of a family that, despite all the fractures, was reclaiming the bond Andrew and Margaret had always wanted their sons to preserve. To celebrate, Helena suggested a simple dinner right there at the transport company once the workday ended. They gathered around a large table in the company's break room. Some employees had already left, but those who stayed joined in cheerfully. The atmosphere was relaxed, filled with camaraderie. During this improvised gathering, Helena raised a glass for a toast. She asked for everyone's attention and spoke emotionally, thanking them for their dedication to the company. She commended Michael as a pillar of honesty and commitment, and did not forget to mention Logan, who had initially been viewed with suspicion but had now earned respect. She concluded with a sentence that resonated in everyone's minds. "It's not money that defines us, but how we build our story and care for the people around us. Our greatest assets are not things." Applause broke the silence, and Michael felt a wave of warmth fill his face. He discreetly looked at Helena, smiling, then turned his gaze to Sophia, who was almost clapping along. The little girl had already absorbed the spirit of that moment. Family unity, the reclaiming of principles, and the value of honest work. After the meal, as they tidied up the space, Logan approached Michael with a grateful expression. "You know none of this would have happened without your help. I know I'm still far from making up for all the harm I caused, but I'll do my best to honor our parents. I learned my lesson the hard way, and now I want to rebuild my life through love." Michael looked up at the starry sky, as if hoping to see Andrew and Margaret's reflection there. In his memory, they were still alive. Andrew, driving his first truck with Margaret's name painted on the side, Margaret herself, urging her sons to stay united. It was both moving and strengthening. He placed a hand on Logan's shoulder. "Dad and Mom will be proud to see us together again. The important thing is for us to keep the values they taught us. Nothing can replace the satisfaction of knowing we're doing the right thing." Finally, as the night wore on, everyone said their farewells. Michael and Helena, along with Sophia, drove back to the house of their dreams, cozy, elegant, and minimalist, which they proudly called home. While he kissed his daughter goodnight, he noticed a serene smile on the little girl's face, aware of being loved and protected. Helena stood by the doorway, touched, certain that together they formed a real family, anchored in solid principles. They had achieved prosperity in many aspects of their lives. Later, sitting on the porch, the two spoke about the future. The transport company was expanding with branches in several states, yet they wanted to keep everything operating in a sustainable, honest, balanced way. The atmosphere was one of contentment, reminding them that true success was not limited to numbers or superficial achievements. Rather, the biggest victory was realizing that love, honesty, and gratitude brought a fuller, more harmonious life. Out on Arizona's highways, in that starkly beautiful landscape, Michael had left his deepest sorrows behind, finding a new reason to smile alongside Helena and Sophia. And Logan, far away, was also laying the foundations for a dignified future. This way, Andrew and Margaret's values not only persisted, but flourished with each new dawn, proving that integrity and compassion are the most powerful legacy anyone can bear.